Hey Doug, how you doing?
I'm doing well. I wanted to show you one of my favorite artworks in the Pioneer Place Mall.
All right.
This is Sean Healy's Golden Hallway, and it is a work about power. And each one of these little bubbles has a person or a common everyday occurrence trapped behind the glass.
Well, so is this how you want to start the show?
Well, yeah, I thought, how would you want to start it?
Well, I don't know. I was thinking something jazzy, something like this. Oh, hey Doug.
Hi, Mary. What you doing?
I'm reading a comic book with strong female characters.
Well, actually, Mary, strong female characters are sexist. No, Mary, I don't like how that works at all as a beginning for the show. First of all, I look like an asshole.
All right, fine. Well, so then what are we going to do?
I want to make the show start like this.
We live in a society.
In a lecture entitled The End of Ideology and given to the Association for Psychological Science in 2007, Professor Kyle Schur observed that after World War II, many sociologists concluded that ordinary people were not inclined to be ideological. Regular folks apparently, quote, lacked the consistency to be considered ideological, unquote, and studies demonstrated that, quote, there was little difference in the psychological processing of liberals and conservatives, unquote. Schur brought up this previously consensual view in order to argue against it. New studies apparently demonstrate that there are significant psychological differences between conservatives and liberals, for instance, and further that consistency in thought or ideological commitment is on the rise. But just what does Kyle Schur mean when he refers to ideology? Most of the time, when people use the word ideology, they use it as a pejorative. Someone is said to be ideological if they're cherry-picking facts to suit their preferred theory, or if they're prevaricating in order to avoid an uncomfortable truth. But there is another definition of ideology that comes from the writings of Karl Marx, that, while still carrying a pejorative meaning, is a bit more nuanced. In his book, The German Ideology, Marx used the word a bit differently from how it is used today. For Marx, the German ideologists who he rallied against weren't abstract but specific. They were, in fact, his fellow young Hegelians. Marx called the left-wing interpreters of Georg Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel ideologists, not because their worldview was biased, not because they were avoiding the truth, but because they themselves were primarily concerned with ideologies and worldviews. The young Hegelians were, according to Marx, like the, quote, valiant fellow who had the idea that men were drowned in water only because they were possessed with the idea of gravity. This fellow believed that, if we were to knock this notion out of our heads, say by stating it to be a superstition, a religious concept, we would be sublimely protected against any danger from water, unquote. Many social critics today act as young Hegelians. Those who are most concerned about how women are portrayed in advertising, for instance, or with whether or not this or that television or movie character is pushing this or that agenda, presume that women are pressured to be beautiful or that homosexuality is generally more accepted today than it has been in the past, primarily, or even exclusively, due to the ideas people hold in their heads. People who think and evaluate the world ideologically are similar to conspiracy theorists who believe that our television sets are brainwashing us. They treat what is said in the media, what is represented on the silver screen or on our smartphones, as a set of directions that are dictated to the public, instead of understanding these televisual phantoms to be a subset of the various discourses that we humans create in various attempts to understand and make sense of our real lived conditions. Again, quoting Marx, the phantoms formed in the human brain or on television are also necessarily sublimates of our material life process, which is empirically verifiable and bound to material premises. Morality, religion, metaphysics, and all the rest of ideology and their corresponding forms of consciousness thus no longer retain the semblance of independence. They have no history, no development. But men, developing their material production and their material intercourse, alter, along with this, their real existence, their thinking, and the products of their thinking. With all that said, there have been critics who have at least seemed to take a materialist understanding of culture and ideology into account as they analyzed both mass communications technologies and mass culture. In this episode of We Live in a Society, we'll consider two of them, Marshall McLuhan and Theodor Adorno. That is, if we can tear ourselves away from Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat, YouTube, Netflix, Vimeo, and Pornhub for long enough to do some reading and thinking, we'll consider them.
Tell me a little bit about your memories of television when you were a kid.
Television was everything, and it was also, I knew it was garbage.
So-
You know, the news anchors want to come on and critique themselves, that kind of thing.
Self-hating.
Yeah.
Self-hating is what that is.
Self-hating TV stars
Yeah.
would come on and call themselves stars of the boob tube. Mm-hmm. And also there was a sense amongst parents, I think, at that time that you should limit the amount of time your kid spends watching TV.
Yeah.
So they tried to monitor that, but mostly
They just wanted to park you in front of
more than 6 hours might raise an eyebrow.
Mm-hmm.
I had a TV, and of course, in the back of the house, and I'll go back there to watch shows like Cosmos.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, actually, I'm making myself sound better than I was. It was really Doctor Who.
Yeah,
And then Cosmos, you know, maybe when my parents were around. And Star Trek, of course,
Yeah.
the original Star Trek
Yeah.
and rerun.
That was great.
I was a big nerd. I was the kind of guy that
No.
couldn't stop talking about Star Trek, and I used to wear the same parka
Yeah.
to school every day in
Why?
junior high. What do you mean why?
Why did you do that?
It was my jacket. It was mine. It was important. It was who I was. It was part of me. Never washed it.
Oh, that makes it better. That's
Hot or
great.
cold, wore the same jacket, covered in dirt. What
Yeah.
about you? What did you think about TV? Or how did TV affect your life?
I just remembered. I used to write Fantasy Island fan fiction. That's what I used to do. My God, Fantasy
That's your
Island.
repressed
I had
memory.
such a crush on Mr. Rourke. Oh my God, he was dreamy.
Ricardo Montalban? Really? Oh my God.
Oh my God, he made my heart go pitter pat. I was like 13 years old, and I used to write.
Ricardo
Fantasy Island.
Montalban, when you were 13 years old, was already 60. Oh my God.
So, but I would write this fanfic, and I was so embarrassed by it because, you know, I mean, sexual fantasies about Ricardo Montalban are maybe something to be a bit embarrassed about. I would write this fanfic, and then I would hide it. So we had one of those drop ceilings, kind of like we have here at Bimart, which
Yeah.
don't pan up because they'll make everybody dizzy. They have a drop ceiling here, and I would hide the fanfic. I would like write it out, and then I would hide my little notebook up in the drop ceiling so that no one would read my filthy fantasies about Ricardo Montalban. Ooh, oh, okay, anyway. But, so my point though, what I was trying to make, is going off the rails real fast.
Yeah.
But my point that I'm trying
What
to
about
make,
the Fonz?
oh, ugh, no, font, ew.
I had a fantasy about being the Fonz.
I was gonna say, I thought you were gonna go a totally different direction
No.
with that, and I was gonna be really interested, but okay, fine.
I did have a poster of Captain Kirk with
Yeah.
his shirt ripped that was like in my bedroom that I would look up at every once in a while. A little blood. But I was like, there's something about that poster being in my room makes me feel uncomfortable. I wasn't sure what it was.
I'd be uncomfortable describing that if I were you.
Yeah, but,
just so you know, just to share.
Given that Marx was a materialist, a question that might not always arise when encountering a Marxist critique of culture, but perhaps ought to arise, is this one. What could a materialist possibly have to say about culture? After all, we wouldn't expect Einstein to produce critiques of Shakespeare based on his theory of relativity, or expect that Barbara McClintock would analyze the films of Alfred Hitchcock using cytogenetics. Why then do we expect Marx, or if not Marx, then Marxists, to have something interesting to say about art, religion, literature, and all the rest of what we broadly conceive of as culture? The answer to this question is that when Marx talks about materialism, he means something different than what we might commonly think of as materialism. That is, he does not conceive of the world as consisting only of dead matter that interacts either mechanically or randomly to produce predestined or utterly meaningless results. In his philosophical manuscripts, Vladimir Lenin once wrote that intelligent idealism is closer to intelligent materialism than metaphysical, undeveloped, dead, crude, and rigid materialism. However, the easiest way to understand Marxist materialism is to put aside long-standing philosophical questions about a substance called matter, to at least temporarily shelve problems we might have if we were to attempt to adequately define what is physical, and instead to temporarily accept what the linguist and philosopher Noam Chomsky claims about materialist notions, or notions of what he calls the physical.
But there hasn't been any concept of physical for hundreds of years. There was one in the early scientific revolution, a very intuitive concept of the physical. That's what inspired Galileo, Descartes, Leibniz, Newton, Lagrange, many others all throughout the modern history of science. But it's been recognized, but it was already recognized after Newton that it's gone. Like Locke recognized it, Hume recognized it. For Hume, it's not only gone, it's a total mystery beyond our intellectual capacities. And that we can speculate about, but it's certainly gone.
Rather than taking up questions of ontology, Marx's move was pragmatic. Regardless of whether or not there's a world that exists out there beyond our conceptions, a world that is physical, we can certainly know that we act as though such a world exists, and moreover, that we relate to this world of nature, or to this material world, in a consistent or predictable way. Namely, we rely upon it for our sustenance. As Engels noted at Marx's grave, Marx discovered the laws of development of human history. The simple fact, hitherto concealed by an overgrowth of ideology, that mankind must first of all eat, drink, have shelter and clothing before it can pursue politics, science, art, religion, and so on. That therefore, the production of the immediate material means, and consequently the degree of economic development attained by a given people, form the foundation upon which the state institutions, the legal conceptions, art, and even the ideas on religion have been evolved, and in the light of which they must therefore be explained. Marshall McLuhan, like Marx, was a materialist, and he was a fan of the technological development engendered by capitalist relations. In his book, Understanding Media, McLuhan wrote that the era of electronic communication and automation would be a time when the damage done to humanity in the modern era was undone. The fragmentation of society brought on by the demands of industry, the way mankind's labor was divided up in service to the ideas engendered by machinery, would be undone by circuits, networks, radio waves, and the expanding force of automation. McLuhan famously said that the medium is the message, or the massage. By that he meant that technologies that we use to communicate our ideas not only shape our ideas, but are more important than our ideas. A conservative critic of television named Neil Postman would turn to McLuhan to provide a framework for his rejection of the Children's Television Workshop and programs like Sesame Street. Postman wrote, "Each medium, like language itself, makes possible a unique mode of discourse by providing a new orientation for thought, for expression, for sensibility," which of course is what McLuhan meant in saying the medium is the message. Postman went on from there to complain that despite seeming to teach young children to recognize the letters in the alphabet or to count to 12, what Sesame Street was really doing was teaching children the sensibility of television. And while McLuhan emphasized how television and radio were returning people to a more ancient oral tradition and bringing on local networks of power and information, or as he put it, creating a global village or a globe composed of villages, Postman considered this turn away from linear rationality and national citizenship as regressive. Television turned young people into passive, narcissistic savages. However, regardless of the moral judgment we might want to attach to this change away from the printed word and literacy, the claim relies upon a material foundation. What brings on social change is not merely the ideas in our heads, but the techniques of transmission. What matters most aren't the words written on a page or spoken into a microphone, but the difference between penmanship and voice acting. What is material is the form that our ideas take. The Mona Lisa may be smiling, but that smile will be interpreted differently when seen in oil, on a cathode tube, or on a flat screen monitor attached to a digital computer. The critical theorist Theodor Adorno appears, in many ways, to be McLuhan's opposite. Glad to be back in Europe after spending nearly a decade in California, he was in no mood to celebrate when he wrote his essay, How to Look at Television, in 1954. For Adorno, the institutions of capitalist communication had to be understood precisely in terms of their sometimes latent content. In fact, Adorno argued that an attempt should be made, with the aid of depth psychological categories and previous knowledge of mass media, to crystallize a number of theoretical concepts by which the potential effect of television, its impact upon various layers of the spectator's personality, could be studied. In many ways, Adorno was a precursor to a critic like Postman. He was convinced that television and films were turning working men and women into infants. But for Adorno, the trouble wasn't a matter of information flows. The increasing delinquency and immaturity in the public wasn't caused by a return to an oral tradition, but was instead due to the transformation of culture. Culture was no longer a set of practices performed either by educated elites or everyday people, but was instead a collection of commodities, divisible by type, and aimed at the consumer market. The roots of the debasement of culture went back to the 18th century, back to the invention of the popular novel by authors like Defoe and Richardson. While this might appear to be a purely cultural, even literary critique, was actually an attempt at a political economic criticism, and thereby was an objection to television based on a somewhat Marxist analysis. However, when Adorno wrote, "Today, the commercial production of cultural goods has become streamlined, and the impact of popular culture upon the individual has concomitantly increased. This process has not been confined to quantity, but has resulted in new qualities." He was leaving out of his analysis the specific way that a quantity of cultural products takes on various qualities. When Adorno claimed that the ideals of conformity and conventionalism were inherent in popular novels from the very beginning, he left the material organization that the readers of Defoe were meant to conform to undescribed. In his book, Neglected and Misunderstood, Theodor Adorno, Zero Book's author Stuart Walton quotes Adorno's Marginalia to Theory and Practice. Adorno wrote, "The theory of surplus value does not tell how one should start a revolution." This quote may help to explain why the Frankfurt School turned away from Marx's materialist critique and instead turned to Freud, Nietzsche, and others in their attempt to understand the failure of revolutionaries in the 20th century. However, while it's true that understanding the mechanisms of political economy through Marx's explanations in Capital won't provide a blueprint for revolution, the ideas there might help us understand what such a revolution should attempt to accomplish, if only negatively. How should we ultimately judge McLuhan and Adorno in regards to their materialism? McLuhan's faults on this score are relatively easy to spot. by focusing on the forms of communication to the exclusion of the forms of material production, by leaving out how television, radio, and digital computers are manufactured. He ignored the ways that the new media were already stamped by the regimentation of the machine culture he thought babies raised on television would inevitably transcend. McLuhan's suggestion, for instance, that electric light was pure information, missed the fact that before a light bulb could arrive in a family home, it first had to be produced by the very industries through the same divided up labor processes that McLuhan thought the light bulb prophesized against. Adorno's cultural turn, on the other hand, is mostly misleading. By turning his attention to the norms required by the institutions involved in the commodification of nature, he was abiding by material analysis. However, his emphasis on the consumption of media, his obsession with the problem of the massive scale of information confronting modern people, ended up de-emphasizing the peculiarities of the production process that mattered most. The one normative value Adorno didn't speak of in his essay on television, for instance, was value itself. That is, not just any value, but the value produced by abstract labor, the value that directs productive activities in societies where industrial modes prevail.
Yeah, I mean, this is Florida ceiling
This is a movie
videotapes. Yeah, VHS.
Uh-huh.
And I thought this would be a great place to come and take a look around for movies and also to test out Adorno's theory about mass media and there's something about Mary. Adorno thought that in a society where culture is mass produced, you would find the same cultural object, same story, same kind of tune maybe, produced over and over and over again,
Right.
just with slight variations, flourishes.
Uh-huh.
And I thought, why don't we come to this Florida ceiling video store and see how many movies we can find that fit that model. The heat's back on, it's cool as ever, and the sizzling smash hit Beverly Hills Cop Axel Foley goes where he doesn't belong. Lethal Weapon 3. They're back, big time. Lethal Weapon 3 is loaded with a full clip of action. Mel Gibson and Danny Glover return. They're mavericks who go up against a corrupt system.
I sure do.
Lethal Weapon 4. Lethal Weapon 4. Guess what? In this one, it's about an anti-Semite and his black friend. Oh, and they're both police detectives going against the system. William Baldwin, Double Bang. Let's see. Billy Benson, an honest cop, is forced to enter a dark world of murder and corruption when his partner goes bad and begins doing business with small-time mobsters in Double Bang. Double Edge. Tony Luca is a tough, cynical police detective who plays by his own rules on the mean streets of New York City. Luca's no-hold-barred style clashes with Kim's calculated methods and causes them to battle each other almost as much as they battle the vicious gangsters they're sworn to destroy. But, they work it out and they beat the bad guys. Blue Thunder. Roy Schneider stars in this intense action thriller as a courageous police officer pilot battling government fanatics planning to misuse an experimental attack helicopter. So you know what he is? He's a cop going against a corrupt system in Blue Thunder. The Spree. Police Detective Bram Hatcher is hot on a trail of Zinnia Kelly, a sexy but brilliant jewel thief who goes after what she wants and gets it every time. When he catches up to her, he finds out he can't deny his attraction to her. I think that's a different kind of movie.
How many copies of Heaven Can Wait do you need? They have 3. They have 4 copies of Holy Man. Wow. I didn't know they even made that many copies of Holy Man. In order to understand the connection between economics and culture, or between our material production and our cultural conceptions, let's take an iconic moment of cultural change from the 15th century, a moment that represents both a major technological or material innovation and that clearly changed human culture around the world. Let's consider the invention of the Gutenberg Press. In his book, The Coming Revolution, Ben Reynolds argues that there was a direct connection between the invention of the printing press and the development of capitalism. He wrote that, quote, "Sometime before 1450, a German man named Johannes Gutenberg invented a printing press that worked with movable type. So, at least, the traditional story goes. Between 1450 and 1455, presses were established in Germany and put into operation, each turning out hundreds of books. Text was the first globally mass-produced product, and the printing press was the means of its manufacture." As Reynolds knows, this story of Gutenberg leaves out a rather interesting fact. Namely, a very similar printing press based on movable type had been invented by a Chinese peasant named Pi Sheng hundreds of years earlier. But while the Gutenberg press swept through Europe, bringing with it a mass of cultural, political, and economic changes, indeed providing a model for mass production that was to be taken up over the centuries and that would culminate in the Industrial Revolution, the Chinese printing press did not have similar consequences. Many point to the complexity of Chinese writings, the need for thousands of blocks rather than the few dozen or so blocks required for a European printing press for the different outcomes. However, in her book, The Printing Press as an Agent of Change, Elizabeth L. Eisenstein noted that changes affecting all manner of industries, ranging from winemaking, cheese-making, seal cutting, oil painting, to metallurgy and textile production, have to be taken into account if we're to understand why Gutenberg's press was revolutionary. She wrote, quote, "Insofar as we are nonetheless apt to locate the printing press on our time charts in the 1450s, it rests there as a convenient abstraction, as a summary statement of concrete particulars that must, for the most part, be located elsewhere." Unquote. In order to understand the material basis for political and cultural changes in the world, we must always make an attempt to take note of the history of change that preceded any given massive rupture.
Printing as a vocation attracts many young men and women because it offers real opportunities for steady work, good pay, and advancement. When the monotype keyboard operator presses the keys, punches driven by compressed air perforate a paper ribbon at the top of the machine. When the operator finishes, the ribbon is removed and placed in the casting machine. The perforated paper controls the movements of the machine.
In 1995, there was a debate published in the journal Critical Studies in Mass Communication that illustrates two ways of thinking about communication and especially the media. The players were Nicholas Garnham and Lawrence Grossberg, and the debate was written up in two essays. Garnham wrote the first essay, entitled Political Economy and Cultural Studies, Reconciliation or Divorce. And then Grossberg replied with a rather snarky essay entitled Cultural Studies versus Political Economy. Is anybody else bored with this debate? Grossberg's essay can most usefully be read as an illustrative example of poor argumentation. And we'll do that for a moment, and we'll use Ben Burgis's book, Give Them an Argument, Logic for the Left, to be a guide along the way. Here's a rather long segment from Grossberg's essay. Thus, it is true that cultural studies sees gender and race along with potential markers of difference as alternative structures of domination to class, although I doubt that many people in cultural studies would argue that such differences are in no way determined by those of class. In fact, what they are likely to argue is that any difference, and how it is lived, whether race, gender, class, sexuality, and so forth, is articulated to and by other differences, and the ways in which they are articulated make a difference in the formation of specific capitalisms, in particular countries, for example, rather than to some abstract capitalism. Garnham's political economy becomes ahistorical at just the points that matter. If capitalist societies, rather than modes of production, are variable, how does one understand those variations? Why is it that the USA is not the UK or Japan? These are not just superstructural problems, but issues about the ways social relations develop beyond a simple binary distinction between owners of the means of production and waged labor. But Garnham is unable to consider such questions precisely because he refuses to engage the question of articulation, which is, of course, the principal way in which the relations between production, consumption, politics, and ideology are theorized in cultural studies. Grossberg's first mistake is his equivocation. In his book, Give Them an Argument, Logic for the Left, Burgess defines equivocation this way. The equivocation fallacy is committed when the meaning of a term is switched to create the impression that the premises support a conclusion to which they're actually irrelevant. So, let's note the two ways the word determined is used here. Grossberg both rejects the idea that cultural critics deny that material facts ultimately call the shots or decide what will happen culturally, and changes the meaning of determine so that it means influence or affect in order to make his denial. To make this explicit, here's what he says laid out as an argument. 1. Garnham claims that cultural theorists deny that material production determines cultural outcomes. 2. Cultural theorists admit that cultural outcomes are sometimes influenced by the social form of material production in society. 3. Therefore, cultural theorists do not deny that material production determines cultural outcome. The second fallacy Grossberg makes is more significant. It has to do with the way Grossberg smuggles his conclusion into his premises. When Grossberg claims that Garnham can't consider questions like, why did some cultural practices or ideas arise in the United States rather than in Japan, given that both are capitalist countries, and then quickly offers an explanation for why Garnham has this deficiency, he merely asserts a conclusion that he wishes to reach. In fact, it would certainly be possible to stick strictly to a Marxist conception of class struggle and historical development and explain why, for instance, the notion of the lone cowboy hero developed in the United States and not in Japan. The process of primitive accumulation during the colonization of the United States by Europe simply didn't occur in Japan. Grossberg then goes on to claim that the theory of articulation is precisely what Garnham needs in order to understand the cultural differences between Japan and the United States, without bothering to use articulation theory to explain any cultural differences between the two countries. Political economists find it hard to understand how, within a capitalist social formation, one can study cultural practices and their political effectiveness, the ways in which people make sense of their lives and then act in the light of that understanding, without focusing attention on how the resources for cultural practice, both material and symbolic, are made available in structurally determined ways through the institutions and circuits of commodified cultural production, distribution, and consumption. If this is reductionist or economistic, so be it. It is, for better or worse, the world we actually inhabit. It is Garnham's approach to the question of culture that makes the most sense, and it is his approach that might lead people to making the material changes to the world that are necessary if we're to free ourselves from really existing material constraints that determine what is now a global society. The question facing us isn't whether we need to consider the material effects of capitalism when we think about culture, but why it is that arguments like Grossberg's have any currency at all in academic and cultural circles. Whose interests do these cultural theorists serve? What is in the material interest of scholars and fans who are held thrall by the sort of arguments put forward by Grossberg? I suppose that's a question for a future episode of We Live in a Society.
You look really grumpy. You look like Adorno. That is your grumpy Adorno face.
People said that he resided in the Grand Abyss Hotel. I don't know. I mean, I don't think it's easy to pick up after Adorno and say, oh yeah, well, Adorno's right, and here's our path forward. I would say that after Adorno, after the Frankfurt School, I mean, Habermas was a thinking and discourse.
Why do guys like the Marx Brothers? Guys like the Marx Brothers. The Marx Brothers are not funny. They're not funny.
How dare you?
I got.
Marx Brothers aren't funny. How dare you?
Leave your thoughts below in the comments. No, the Marx Brothers are not funny. No.
Oh my
They're
God.
stupid.
Do you even know who the Marx Brothers are? You're probably mixing them up with someone else in your brain because
Groucho, Harpo, Zeppo, Blimpo,
No, there's no Blimpo.
Pepe.
No, there's Chico, Harpo, Groucho.
I got like 4 out of 5.
Zeppo. There's only 4.
Oh well, I got 2 out of 3.
So why don't you like the Marx? Have you watched any Marx Brothers movies?
No, I just don't like them in principle.
You've never seen a Marx Brothers movie?
Why should I? They're stupid. Why should I watch them if they're stupid?
Oh my God. Oh my God. Oh, my eyes are coming out of my head.
Okay, it'll You want to talk about Adorno some more?
No, I think we're done here.
Well, Doug, that sure was a fun episode. I'm so glad you were here to mansplain everything to me.
Well, I was certainly glad to be of service, Mary.
Well, I think we should do some more of this, like maybe some more episodes. I can think of a whole bunch of things we could do.
Yeah, like what?
Oh, I don't know, like, generational politics.
Or the law of value?
Oh, or the body and intersectionality. Wait, am I not supposed to?
Yeah, you can say intersectionality. Or, well, say it again.
Or, give me another one, though. I didn't want to do intersectionality.
Law of value?
Law of value?
Or Marx's declining rate of profit?
No, let's not do that one.
Why not? It's my favorite one.
I know it's your favorite
Because,
one.
well, you know why we should do that one?
Why?
Because we live in a society, Mary.
That's right, we do.
If you enjoyed this conversation, please do consider supporting us on Patreon. Our patrons help to make sure that Sublation Media can continue to provide interviews, videos, books, and articles that are critical of the left from the left. If you are tired of remaining stuck within bourgeois ideologies and politics, help us sublate them both.